If you've got an LLC or you're thinking about registering one, then you've got to make sure that you don't make these 7 mistakes. They are super easy to avoid, but you just got to know what they are, and today we're going to cover all of them. I'm Vander, an attorney turned entrepreneur who helps online coaches and service providers legally protect and grow their online businesses using my DIY legal templates and my Ultimate Bundle program. And I've helped thousands and thousands of online entrepreneurs register LLCs and learn how to properly use them. You can catch me here each week on YouTube sharing my best legal tips and helping you learn how to legally protect your online business. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit subscribe and ring the bell so you get a notification every single time I post a new video. Oh, and comment below and say subscribe so I know you're new here and I can say hi. In this video, I'm teaching you the 7 most disastrous LLC mistakes that I see people making that are so easy to fix. So I really want today to clear up any of the myths, any of the confusion that you might have around having an LLC or registering an LLC, and make sure that you can avoid easily these 7 disastrous LLC mistakes. Let's get into it. LLC mistake number 1. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see LLC owners make is that they actually register an LLC and they do that whole part properly, but then they actually don't use their LLC properly when they're operating their businesses. So people sometimes think that you can just register an LLC and then you can go by any name that you want and magically it'll somehow be connected to your LLC. So instead, when you register an LLC, if you register a business as, I always use the example of Sally's Cupcakes LLC, right? That is the name that you need to use in your advertising and marketing anywhere across the internet, anywhere you're promoting your business, unless you register what's called a DBA, a doing business as name. Some states call them alternate names, fictitious names, trade names. So they have different terms for different states. But in general, unless you register a DBA that allows you to use a different name for your business in your marketing and advertising of that business, like in the Sally's Cupcakes LLC example, maybe the LLC would register a DBA as Delicious Cakes. I don't know. That's just an example, a terrible example, but an example. So if Sally, for example, wanted to have on her sign of her building, Delicious Cakes, is that what I mean it? Delicious Cakes. And she also wanted her Instagram, advertising to be about that. And her business cards were going to say that. And her website was going to say that. And she didn't want to have to mention Sally's Delicious Cupcakes LLC anywhere in her branding and marketing. She would have to register a DBA in order to properly attach it, legally speaking, to the registered LLC, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually using our registered LLC name as we registered it, exactly how we registered it, unless we've done otherwise and taken the steps to get an alternate trade name, fictitious name. So you can obviously talk to an attorney near you to find out if the name that you're using is okay, if you need a DBA, if you can get one, all that kind of stuff. They're pretty simple to do. The second thing that's pretty disastrous when it comes to making an LLC mistake is when LLC owners commingle their personal money with their business money. So if you've ever taken any of my trainings before, I always say you got to keep it separated. So you got to keep them totally separate. You have to have all your personal stuff in a totally separate account. And then you have your business account, your business checking, maybe even savings account. And any money that comes to and from your business goes through that account first, right? Once you pay yourself, you can put your personal money into your personal account. But the business stuff, anything that's coming from your sales, all of your expenses should be going through that account that are related to the business. Now, it's really important when it comes to this part that we don't commingle those funds and that we also don't treat our business money like it's personal money, right? So even if you keep things separate, it's really important that we're not buying ourselves things I see a lot of stuff floating around on Instagram of people touting this is a business expense, the Chanel handbag's a business expense. Most of these things are not business expenses. They're not related to your business at all. And so it's really important that if you want to buy yourself something for yourself as a person and not something that's in relation to the business, that's not a qualified business expense, that you actually just properly pay yourself, right? Take the money from your business the way that you can. It depends on what kind of business you have and how you have it set up. But you pay yourself and then you use your personal money to go buy the handbag or whatever it is that you want. So it's really important that we keep it separate and that we treat our business money as business money and only spend that money on qualified business expenses. Third LLC mistake that I see people make is that they'll name their business something that's already in use or even that's already somebody's registered trademark, right? So when we go to register our businesses, we first need to make sure that our business name is available in our state. I always look to make sure that it's, not being used elsewhere, mostly because I don't want to have like the same exact name, for my business as somebody else who's doing the same thing. It would be confusing and could cause a legal problem. The other issue, though, that you want to look at is that even if the name is available in your state when you go to register it, you also want to check on the uspto.gov website to make sure that somebody hasn't registered that name or that phrase as a registered trademark. So that's a very important step to do, and one that people often miss because they'll just check that their state, has this name available. But it's also important that you do the trademark search as well. It's a free search. You can definitely do it yourself. I'll drop the link in the description. The other thing that you want to be aware of is that if you are going to go with a DBA, the doing business as name, so that you can, advertise and market your business under a different name than the LLC name, then you also need to do the same exact kind of search for that. Working with your own attorney on this can be super, super helpful to make sure that there's nothing that you miss, because you don't want to accidentally trigger somebody coming after you for infringing on their name. The fourth LLC mistake that I see people make is not having an operating agreement in place, especially when they're going into business with someone else. So an operating agreement is the living, breathing document of your LLC, of your company, and it lays out the rules and the procedures for how things are going to happen if something goes wrong, if one of you gets sick, if the business has to be sold, if someone, God forbid, they die, all of the kind of worst case scenarios that lawyers typically think about, we need to know. So we typically put those kinds of procedures in an operating agreement. And a lot of times when people go into business with someone else, they don't know that they need to have this kind of document, or they get a really cruddy, like basic template from somewhere, and it doesn't have all of the robust language that they need. If you're going into business with someone else and you're starting an LLC together, I highly recommend that you each get your own attorneys, and then you could even have a third attorney that would be the business's attorney, right? Because you each have your own separate and distinct interests as separate members of the LLC, and then the company also has its own interests, right? So somebody kind of needs to be protecting it from all angles. That would be the best case scenario. Of course, you want to get the advice from your own attorney, speak with him or her about what's best for you, knowing what your rights and obligations are. And as always, unfortunately, with legal stuff, when you're going into business with someone else, I don't care if they're your best friend, your brother, your mother, it does not matter. I have seen it all. I used to do business divorces. Trust me, you want to cover this no matter who you're going into business with. One of the most important things is for you to, unfortunately, have those hard conversations with your own attorney about what all the worst case scenario possibilities are, right? If something goes wrong in the business, if you break up, if you don't feel like the other person's pulling their weight, if the person steals, if somebody wants to come along and buy it from you, what happens, right? And I would strongly encourage you to have that discussion with your attorney about whether or not it is a good idea to split the business 50-50, because it's typically not. Even if you own an LLC by yourself, you can create an operating agreement or work with an attorney to have an operating agreement created for you. Some states really heavily rely on these, legally speaking, for you to show that you are a, true and blue LLC and not just operating as some like sham individual under an LLC. And the cool thing about having an operating agreement for your business is that if you have an operating agreement, you can control the rules and procedures for your LLC, versus when you don't have them, your state's LLC laws get applied to you by default. The fifth LLC mistake that I see people make most often is not becoming an S-Corp when they should. So a lot of people get confused about this, and S-Corps are, their own animal for a whole different YouTube video. But you can let me know below if you want a video on S-Corps. But in general, becoming an S-Corp is actually a tax election status, right? So a lot of times people will confuse this and think that they're becoming an S-Corp as like a type of business, like a business entity. You're actually still an LLC, but when you're an LLC in America, by default, if you don't elect otherwise, you're taxed as an individual. You're actually taxed as a sole proprietor, which is confusing, I know. So when in America, you're taxed by default as a sole proprietor, you can at some point go to the government, both on the state level and the IRS on the federal level, and tell them, I want to be treated for tax purposes as an S corporation instead. That is really helpful for you to do once your business starts making a significant amount of profit, and also once you can pay yourself a consistent salary, and you want to get payroll set up and you're ready and able to deal with some of the, administrative fees that come along with that. Becoming an S-Corp is never something that you should do yourself, and it's always something that you should do under the guidance of your own CPA. So you want to consult with your CPA about when the right time is for your business to become an S-Corp, if ever, and what that means for you both financially in terms of your take-home pay, how you'll be paid, but also how you'll pay your taxes and what that looks like too. I'm a really big fan of talking to your CPA about this early so that you have it on their radar in terms of knowing that if and when that becomes a possibility for your business, you want to do it, right? So you don't want to wait for your CPA to tell you like, hey, I think you should become an S-Corp. Hopefully a good CPA would do that for you, but just in case, I want you to be proactive and tell them like, hey, when it becomes the right time, I'd be interested in having that conversation. And I want to understand better what exactly that entails. The sixth LLC mistake that people make most often is just messing up their taxes, right? So I have literally heard it all at this point in like 6 years in business. I have heard from people being like, I don't have to pay taxes if I only make $10,000, right? Or I don't have to pay taxes if I do this or stand on my head or turn around. I don't know. People come up with some really crazy ideas. So you want to work with an accountant anytime that you have a business, because not only is it going to be helpful for you in terms of making sure you don't break the law or forget to pay your taxes or pay too much or too little, but you're also going to make sure that you capture the most amount of deductions that you can and all of those qualified business expenses so that you're paying the least amount of taxes that you can, legally speaking. Speaking of paying taxes, if you haven't yet, go back and watch last week's video all about how to reduce your business income legally. Okay, the seventh and final LLC mistake that I actually see maybe the most often is people not keeping their LLC up to date or current, especially if they move, right? But I see it even when people don't move. So every year, typically speaking, or your state might do this every other year. I have heard from 1 or 2 clients that their states don't do renewals at all, but that is definitely the exception. Every year, typically, your state will send you some sort of notification, whether it's by mail or email, asking you to renew your LLC or file what they call an annual report. So that's where you update the state as to whether any of your information has changed, like your contact information, who you want your registered agent to be, where your business is doing business in terms of the registered address, anything like that. The cool thing is that typically speaking, you have to pay a small fee. That part's not cool, but you have to pay a very small fee to renew your LLC whenever they send this to you. But it includes whatever you're able to update. So if you did change your address or you did want to change your registered agent, you get to do that at the time that you pay your annual report fee, which you'd have to pay anyway. If you change it mid-year or at any other time, you'll probably pay a fee for updating that information at that time and then also have to pay your annual renewal fee. So you just want to do any updating that you can. Sometimes it just happens, life happens. But if you can, you want to do it when your annual report comes, if your state does that. I highly recommend, if you're watching this video, that you just find out what your state's renewal process looks like. Is it every year? Is it at the same time every year? Is it every other year? How will you be notified? And it's definitely something that if I were you, I would add to my calendar just to make sure I had my eyes out for. The other part of this is keeping your LLC up to date if you move, right? So if you move, you typically have 2 options available to you. You can typically move the LLC with you, meaning that you dissolve the LLC in the first state where you used to live, and you register like a new LLC in your new state, right? Or you can leave your LLC in the original state and then register as what's called a foreign entity in your new state. There are different, pluses and minuses. There are tax implications, financial implications in terms of what you'll have to file. So those are all things that you should do under the guidance of your CPA and understanding how that would affect you and which option based on that would be best for you. So see, those 7 things aren't too bad to try to avoid when you have an LLC. And if you're wondering how you go about actually properly registering an LLC and how you act properly like an LLC online, then I want to invite you to watch my free legal workshop, 5 Steps to Legally Protect and Grow Your Online Business. In it, I teach you my 5-step strategy to legally protecting your online coaching and service providing business, including how to properly register your business and act like an LLC, as well as how to legally protect your website, use contracts to protect yourself, protect your content from online copycats, and so much more. So you can click the link in the description to watch my free legal workshop right now. With that, leave me a comment below and let me know if this video was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed it. I can't wait to see you next week.